From now on, you'll work 2 jobs to pay for your sister's tuition, my father announced at dinner, not even bothering to look up from his plate. Destiny deserves the best education money can buy, and since you're not college material anyway, this is how you'll contribute to the family. Little did he know that his cruel decision would come back to haunt him in ways he never imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. To understand how we got to this point, I need to take you back to the beginning of my story. My name is Roxanne Carver, and I grew up in the small industrial town of Millfield Heights, where opportunities were as scarce as optimism. My father, Theodore Carver, owned a moderately successful plumbing supply business that had been passed down through 3 generations. He was the kind of man who measured success in dollars and believed that some people were simply born winners while others were destined to serve them. I was 21 when this conversation happened, having just finished community college with an associate degree in business administration. While my grades weren't spectacular, I had dreams of maybe taking over the family business someday or perhaps starting something of my own. I'd always been the responsible one, helping Dad with bookkeeping on weekends since I was 16, learning the ins and outs of inventory management, and building relationships with our regular customers who seemed to trust me more than they trusted him. My younger sister Destiny was everything I wasn't, or at least, everything my father believed I wasn't. She was 18, stunningly beautiful, and had just graduated as valedictorian from Millfield Heights Academy. While I was practical and hardworking, Destiny was charismatic and ambitious. She had dreams of attending Prestige University, one of the most expensive private schools in the state, where she planned to study pre-med with hopes of becoming a surgeon. The problem was that Prestige University came with a price tag that would make most people's eyes water, nearly $60,000 per year for tuition, room, and board. Even with Destiny's partial academic scholarship, we were looking at roughly $40,000 annually that needed to come from somewhere. My father had always favored Destiny, calling her his little princess and his ticket to respectability. He saw her potential success as a reflection of his own worth, a way to elevate the Carver name beyond our blue-collar roots. That evening when he made his announcement, the 3 of us were sitting around our modest dining table in the cramped kitchen of our 2-bedroom house on Elm Street. The wallpaper was peeling, the linoleum floors were cracked, and the whole place smelled faintly of the pipe tobacco Dad smoked when he was stressed about money. Which, lately, was almost all the time. You heard me correctly, Roxanne, he continued when he saw the shock on my face. Tomorrow you'll start looking for a second job. That degree you just got should help you find something better than the part-time work you've been doing at Henderson's Diner. Maybe you can get some office work during the day and keep your evening shifts at the diner. Dad, that's insane, I protested, my fork clattering against my plate. I'm already working 30 hours a week at Henderson's while helping you with the business paperwork. When would I sleep? Sleep is for people who don't have responsibilities, he replied coldly. Your sister has a real future ahead of her. She's going to be a doctor, Roxanne. A doctor. Do you know what that means for this family? She'll be the first Carver to ever amount to anything significant. The word stung because they revealed what he really thought of me, that I would never amount to anything significant. That my dreams, whatever they might be, were worth sacrificing for Destiny's ambitions. What about the business? I asked, grasping at straws. You always said you might leave it to me someday. How can I learn to run it properly if I'm working 80 hours a week at other jobs? Dad laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the kitchen walls. Honey, let's be realistic. You're not business owner material. You're reliable, sure, and you work hard, but you don't have what it takes to be a leader. The plumbing supply business requires vision, networking skills, the ability to make tough decisions. Destiny has those qualities. You're better suited for following orders. Destiny sat quietly through this entire exchange, occasionally glancing at me with what might have been sympathy, but she never spoke up in my defense. She never told Dad that his plan was unfair or unreasonable. Looking back, I think she was just as surprised as I was, but she was also smart enough to recognize a golden opportunity when she saw one. I've already talked to Bill Morrison down at Morrison Construction, Dad continued. He needs someone to handle their invoicing and scheduling during the day. It's 40 hours a week, but the pay is decent. Combined with your evening shifts at Henderson's, you should be able to cover most of Destiny's expenses. Most? I echoed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Well, I'll contribute what I can from the business, naturally. But the majority of it will be your responsibility. Consider it an investment in the family's future. As I sat there that night, staring at the chipped ceramic mug that held my lukewarm coffee, I realized that my father had just sentenced me to 4 years of backbreaking labor with no regard for my own future, my own dreams, or my own well-being. What he didn't realize was that his decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything, not just for me, but for our entire family. This was the night that everything changed, though none of us knew it yet. Growing up in the Carver household wasn't easy, but I didn't realize just how dysfunctional our family dynamics were until I was much older. My mother, Linda Carver, had died in a car accident when I was 12 and Destiny was 9. The tragedy fundamentally changed our family structure, but not in the way you might expect. Before Mom's death, I was actually the favored child. She used to call me her little entrepreneur, because I was always coming up with schemes to make money, selling lemonade, organizing neighborhood car washes, even starting a small pet-sitting business when I was 10. Mom encouraged my ambitions and often told Dad that I had the Carver business instinct that would serve me well someday. She was the one who first suggested that I might take over the plumbing supply business when I grew up. Destiny, on the other hand, was more of a dreamer back then. She spent her time reading fantasy novels, drawing elaborate pictures of castles and princesses, and putting on little performances for anyone who would watch. Mom loved Destiny's creativity, but she worried that our youngest daughter might struggle in the practical world of Millfield Heights, where artistic pursuits were often seen as frivolous luxuries. Everything shifted after the funeral. Dad, overwhelmed with grief and suddenly responsible for raising 2 daughters alone, seemed to transfer all of his love and hopes onto Destiny. Maybe it was because she looked so much like Mom with her auburn hair and green eyes, or maybe it was because her vulnerability brought out his protective instincts. Whatever the reason, I watched as my father gradually transformed from someone who valued my practical nature into someone who saw me as nothing more than a reliable workhorse. The change wasn't immediate, it happened slowly over the course of several years. At first, Dad just seemed distracted and distant with both of us. He threw himself into work, often staying at the shop until late in the evening, leaving Destiny and me to fend for ourselves. I naturally stepped into a caretaking role, making sure Destiny did her homework, preparing simple dinners, and handling household chores that Mom used to manage. By the time I turned 15, this arrangement had become our new normal. Dad would come home exhausted, barely acknowledging my efforts to keep the household running, but he would always make time to ask Destiny about her day, help her with difficult homework assignments, or listen to her talk about whatever book she was reading. When Destiny discovered an interest in science during her sophomore year of high school, Dad was absolutely thrilled. Finally, he said one evening after Destiny had excitedly explained a chemistry experiment she'd conducted in class, "Someone in this family has real intellectual potential." The comment was made in front of me, as I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes from the dinner I had prepared. I was a junior in high school at the time, maintaining a solid B+ average while working part-time at Henderson's diner and helping Dad with basic bookkeeping for the business. But my practical achievements seemed to pale in comparison to Destiny's academic promise. Our small house on Elm Street became a shrine to Destiny's accomplishments. Her honor roll certificates were framed and displayed prominently in the living room. Her science fair ribbons hung on the refrigerator. When she scored in the 95th percentile on her SATs, Dad took her out for a celebratory dinner at the fanciest restaurant in Millfield Heights, a place called Romano's that we usually could only afford to visit on special occasions. Meanwhile, my achievements went largely unnoticed. When I received a certificate for perfect attendance at work, Dad barely glanced at it. When I successfully implemented a new filing system that improved efficiency at the plumbing supply business, he credited my natural organizational skills, rather than recognizing the thought and effort I had put into the project. The town of Millfield Heights itself played a role in shaping these family dynamics. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and social status was determined by a complex hierarchy that valued both financial success and educational achievement. Dad had always felt insecure about his position in this hierarchy. The plumbing supply business provided a comfortable living, but it didn't carry the prestige of being a doctor, lawyer, or even a high school principal. Our neighbors, the Hutchinson family, had 2 sons who both became engineers and moved to the big city of Riverside, about 2 hours away. Mrs. Hutchinson never missed an opportunity to mention her boys' accomplishments at church or during chance encounters at the grocery store. I could see how these conversations affected Dad, the way his jaw would tighten when Mrs. Hutchinson talked about her youngest son's promotion at the aerospace company where he worked. "That's what real success looks like," Dad would mutter as we drove home from these encounters. Those boys made something of themselves. They didn't just settle for what their parents handed them. As Destiny blossomed into an academically gifted and socially popular teenager, Dad began to see her as his redemption, his chance to finally have something to brag about at church, something that would elevate the Carver name and earn him the respect he felt he deserved. The fact that this elevation would come at my expense seemed to be a sacrifice he was more than willing to make. By my senior year of high school, the pattern was firmly established. Destiny was the golden child with unlimited potential, and I was the dependable support system whose primary value lay in my ability to facilitate her success. I told myself that this was just temporary, that once I finished community college and proved myself capable, Dad would start to see me differently. I couldn't have been more wrong. The summer before Destiny's senior year of high school marked the beginning of what I now recognize as the final phase of our family's transformation. Dad had always been supportive of Destiny's academic pursuits, but during those hot months in Millfield Heights, his encouragement evolved into something approaching obsession. It started when Destiny announced that she wanted to attend a pre-med summer camp at Riverside University. The program cost $1,500 for 2 weeks, which was a significant expense for our family, but Dad didn't hesitate for even a moment. He liquidated a small emergency fund he'd been building for business repairs and sent Destiny off to what he called her first step toward medical school. While Destiny was away learning about anatomy and biochemistry, I found myself working longer hours than ever before. Dad had me covering additional responsibilities at the plumbing supply shop, including managing vendor relationships and handling customer complaints, tasks that required real skill and judgment. But when customers complimented my work ethic or problem-solving abilities, Dad would deflect the praise. "Roxanne's always been good at following instructions," he would say with a dismissive wave. "She gets that from her mother's side of the family." They were all very reliable people. The way he said reliable made it sound like a consolation prize, something you settled for when you couldn't achieve anything more impressive. When Destiny returned from summer camp, she was more focused and determined than I had ever seen her. She spoke confidently about organic chemistry and human physiology, using scientific terminology that impressed everyone who heard her. More importantly, she had connected with other ambitious students from wealthy families who were also planning to pursue careers in medicine. "Dr. Patterson says I have real potential," she announced at dinner one evening, referring to one of the camp instructors. "He told me that if I maintain my grades and get strong MCAT scores, I could get into any medical school in the country." Dad's eyes practically glowed with pride. "Did you hear that, Roxanne? Any medical school in the country. Can you imagine? Our little Destiny could be studying at Harvard or Johns Hopkins." I tried to share in his enthusiasm, but something about the way he said, "our little Destiny," bothered me. It was as if her success belonged to him, as if her achievements were somehow a reflection of his own worth as a father and a man. The dynamic became even more pronounced when Destiny started her senior year. Dad attended every parent-teacher conference, every college information session, and every academic awards ceremony. He bought her a new laptop for research and writing, hired a private tutor to help her prepare for the MCAT, and even started talking about taking out a second mortgage on the house to pay for her undergraduate education. "Investment in education is never wasted," he would say whenever I questioned the escalating expenses. "Destiny's going to be earning 6 figures as a surgeon. We'll make all of this money back 10 times over." Meanwhile, I was finishing my associate degree in business administration while working increasingly demanding hours at Henderson's Diner. The restaurant was struggling financially, and the owner, Mrs. Henderson, had been forced to cut staff. This meant that I was often working double shifts, covering for missing waitresses and occasionally helping with basic cooking when the kitchen was shorthanded. The physical exhaustion was manageable, but the emotional toll was becoming harder to bear. I would come home after a 14-hour day to find Dad and Destiny huddled over college brochures and scholarship applications, planning a future that seemed to have no place for me in it. One evening in early fall, I tried to broach the subject of my own future with Dad. I had been thinking about pursuing a bachelor's degree in business management, possibly through evening classes at the Regional University Extension program in Millfield Heights. "Dad, I've been looking into some business programs," I said during a rare moment when Destiny was upstairs studying and we had a chance to talk privately. "There's a degree completion program that I could do part-time while still helping with the shop." He barely looked up from the invoices he was reviewing. "That sounds expensive, Roxanne. And honestly, I'm not sure it's necessary. You're already doing fine with the associate degree. But if I had a bachelor's degree, I could take on more responsibilities at the business. Maybe we could expand, bring in new product lines, develop relationships with bigger contractors." Dad set down his pen and looked at me with the kind of patient expression you might use with a child who was asking for something unrealistic. "Sweetheart, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but expanding the business would require capital we don't have, especially with Destiny's education expenses coming up. Besides, the plumbing supply industry isn't really growing around here. Most of the younger contractors are moving to Riverside or other bigger cities where there's more construction happening. So what's my future supposed to be?" I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "Am I just going to work at Henderson's Diner and do bookkeeping for the rest of my life?" Dad's expression softened slightly, but his words were devastating. "There's nothing wrong with honest work, Roxanne. Not everyone can be a doctor or a professional. Someone has to keep the practical world running, and you're good at that. You're dependable, hardworking, and people trust you. Those are valuable qualities." The conversation ended there, but it crystallized something that had been building in my mind for months. Dad didn't see me as someone with potential, he saw me as someone whose role was to support other people's potential. In his vision of the future, Destiny would become a successful surgeon while I remained in Millfield Heights, managing the small-town life that she would eventually leave behind. What made this realization even more painful was that I could see Destiny starting to adopt Dad's perspective. She had begun talking about her future plans with a casual confidence that assumed my support would always be available. When she mentioned needing help with college application essays, she simply expected me to proofread them. When she worried about the cost of textbooks, she looked to me to find solutions. Neither of them seemed to consider that I might have dreams of my own, ambitions that extended beyond serving as Destiny's support system. The assumption that my life would revolve around facilitating her success had become so ingrained in our family dynamic that questioning it felt almost like betrayal. But the seeds of that questioning had been planted, and they were beginning to grow. The warning signs of what was coming began appearing during Destiny's college application process, though I was too focused on keeping up with my own responsibilities to fully recognize them at the time. Dad's behavior became increasingly erratic as the stakes of Destiny's future seemed to consume more and more of his mental energy. It started with small things that individually seemed harmless but collectively painted a troubling picture. Dad began checking Destiny's grades obsessively, logging into the school's parent portal multiple times per day to monitor her progress in real time. When she received anything less than an A on an assignment, he would interrogate her about what went wrong and how she planned to improve. "AB+ in AP chemistry isn't going to get you into medical school," he would lecture during these sessions. "Pre-med is the most competitive track there is. Every grade matters, every test score matters, every extracurricular activity matters." The pressure he was putting on Destiny was intense, but what disturbed me more was how he began viewing everything else in our lives through the lens of how it might affect her academic performance. When Mrs. Henderson asked me to work additional hours during the busy holiday season, Dad initially refused on my behalf. "Roxanne can't take on more shifts right now," he told her when she called the house. "She needs to be available to help Destiny with her college applications." This was news to me. Destiny had never asked for my help with her applications, and I wasn't aware that Dad expected me to provide it. But when I questioned him about it later, he acted as though the arrangement was obvious. "Of course you're going to help her," he said, looking genuinely confused by my surprise. "You're good with paperwork and organization. Destiny needs to focus on her academics, not waste time formatting essays and filling out forms." The expectation that I would sacrifice my own earning opportunities to serve as Destiny's unpaid administrative assistant was presented as such a natural conclusion that arguing against it felt petty. But it was another indication of how Dad's priorities were shifting, how my value to the family was becoming increasingly defined by my usefulness to Destiny's success. The financial pressure was mounting as well. Dad had started talking openly about the costs associated with Destiny's education, not just tuition but also test prep courses, application fees, campus visits, and all the other expenses that came with pursuing admission to competitive universities. He would sit at the kitchen table with a calculator and stacks of papers, muttering numbers under his breath like someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. $47,000 for tuition alone, he would say, shaking his head. Plus room and board, books, lab fees, we're looking at $60,000 per year, minimum. These calculations always took place in front of me, as if Dad wanted me to understand the magnitude of the financial challenge we were facing. But he never included me in discussions about how we might meet that challenge. I was expected to witness the problem without being consulted about potential solutions. The business was struggling more than Dad liked to admit. Several of our longtime customers had switched to larger suppliers who could offer better prices and faster delivery times. The small contractors who formed the core of our customer base were increasingly being squeezed out by bigger companies that brought their own suppliers with them. Dad's pride prevented him from acknowledging these market changes directly, but I could see the stress in the way he snapped at vendors over minor issues and spent long hours staring at declining sales reports. Meanwhile, Destiny seemed oblivious to the mounting tension in our household. She was thriving academically and socially, maintaining her position as valedictorian while serving as president of the science club and volunteering at the local hospital. Her college counselor had praised her well-rounded profile and predicted that she would receive multiple scholarship offers from prestigious universities. But the partial scholarships she was likely to receive would still leave substantial gaps that needed to be filled somehow. Dad had convinced himself that these gaps represented temporary challenges that could be overcome through careful planning and sacrifice. What he hadn't yet admitted, even to himself, was that he was beginning to see me as the primary source of that sacrifice. The breaking point came during a particularly stressful week in February. Destiny had been invited to interview at Prestige University, which Dad viewed as the culmination of all his hopes and dreams for her future. The interview required a trip to the state capital, including hotel accommodations and several days away from school. "This is it," Dad announced as he booked their flights. This interview could determine everything. The trip cost nearly $1,000 that we didn't really have, money that Dad withdrew from the business account despite knowing that we needed those funds to pay suppliers. When I gently suggested that the expense might be excessive, Dad's reaction was more intense than anything I had seen from him before. "Excessive?" he repeated, his voice rising to a level that made Destiny look up from her homework in alarm. "This is your sister's future we're talking about. This is the difference between her becoming a doctor and ending up stuck in this town forever." The implication was clear: ending up stuck in Millfield Heights was a fate to be avoided at all costs, regardless of the financial sacrifice required. It didn't seem to occur to Dad that I was already stuck here, already living the life he was so desperate for Destiny to escape. The interview trip was successful. Destiny charmed everyone she met and received enthusiastic encouragement about her chances of admission. But the financial cost of that success was becoming harder for Dad to ignore. His conversations with vendors became increasingly tense as he stretched payment schedules to their limits. He stopped talking about expanding the business and started mentioning the possibility of taking out loans against our house. Most concerning of all, he began making comments that suggested he was developing a comprehensive plan for financing Destiny's education, a plan that he hadn't yet shared with me but that seemed to involve significant changes to my own life and responsibilities. "We're going to have to get creative," he would say during his evening calculations. "Everyone in the family is going to have to step up and do their part." When he said, "everyone in the family," his eyes would inevitably settle on me, and I could see the wheels turning behind his calculating expression. The foundation was being laid for something that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my life, though I still had no idea how dramatically those alterations would reshape everything I thought I knew about my place in our family. The moment that changed everything happened on a gray Thursday evening in late March. Destiny had just received her acceptance letter from Prestige University, along with a partial scholarship that covered roughly 30% of the total costs. Dad was ecstatic, calling everyone he knew to share the news, his voice filled with the kind of pride I hadn't heard since Mom was alive. "She did it," he kept repeating to anyone who would listen. "My daughter got into one of the best universities in the country." But once the initial euphoria wore off and Dad sat down with the actual financial aid package, reality began to set in. Even with the scholarship, we were still looking at approximately $42,000 per year in expenses. Over 4 years, that amounted to nearly $170,000, more money than our family had ever seen in one place. That evening, after Destiny had gone to bed, Dad spread all the paperwork across the kitchen table like a general planning a military campaign. Financial aid forms, scholarship applications, loan documents, and calculator tape covered every available surface. I was washing dishes from dinner when he started talking, almost to himself at first. "We can take out federal loans for part of it," he muttered, scribbling numbers on a legal pad. "Maybe $15,000 per year. That still leaves $27,000 we need to come up with somehow." I dried my hands and turned to face him, sensing that this was a conversation I needed to be part of. "Have you looked into private loans? Or maybe Destiny could work part-time on campus?" Dad looked up at me with an expression that was both calculating and desperate. "Campus jobs pay minimum wage, maybe 10 hours a week if she's lucky. That's not even a drop in the bucket. And private loans, the interest rates are brutal. We'd end up paying back twice what we borrowed." He went back to his calculations, but I could see his frustration mounting with each number he wrote down. The mathematics of the situation were unforgiving. There simply wasn't enough money in our current circumstances to make Destiny's dream financially viable. What if she went to State University instead? I suggested carefully. The pre-med program there is supposed to be excellent, and with her grades, she'd probably get a full scholarship. The look Dad gave me could have frozen water. "State University," he repeated, as if I had suggested Destiny attend clown college. "Roxanne, this is Prestige University we're talking about. Do you have any idea what kind of doors this opens? The connections she'll make, the opportunities that will be available to her? State University is fine for average students, but Destiny is exceptional." His tone made it clear that questioning Destiny's right to attend the most expensive option was not just wrong but almost morally offensive. In Dad's mind, anything less than the best was a betrayal of her potential and, by extension, a betrayal of the sacrifices the family had already made. Over the next few days, Dad's mood became increasingly volatile as he struggled to find a solution to the financial puzzle. He snapped at customers over minor issues, stayed up late into the night researching scholarship opportunities that Destiny had already missed, and began making phone calls to distant relatives asking for loans that everyone knew he couldn't repay. The breaking point came when he called his brother Marcus in California, a successful contractor who had always looked down on Dad's small-town business. I could hear both sides of the conversation from the next room, and it was painful to listen to. "I'm not asking for charity," Dad was saying, his voice strained with forced dignity. "This is an investment in Destiny's future. She's going to be a surgeon, Marcus. She could pay back whatever you lend us within a few years of finishing her residency." Marcus's response was predictably dismissive. "Ted, I've heard this song before. Remember when you needed money to expand the business 5 years ago? You were going to revolutionize the plumbing supply industry, make us all rich. How did that work out?" "This is different," Dad insisted. "This is about education, about giving my daughter opportunities that we never had." "Your daughter, your responsibility," Marcus replied coldly. "I've got my own kids to worry about, my own expenses to cover. Besides, medical school is no guarantee these days. The field is saturated, insurance companies are squeezing doctors' incomes, she could end up with hundreds of thousands in debt and no way to pay it back." The conversation ended badly, with Dad slamming the phone down and Marcus having made his position crystal clear. There would be no family bailout, no wealthy relative riding to the rescue. If Destiny was going to attend prestige university, Dad would have to find another way to make it happen. That night, I found him sitting at the kitchen table at nearly midnight, surrounded by the same financial documents he'd been studying for weeks. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes had the desperate look of someone who was running out of options. "There has to be a way," he muttered when he noticed me standing in the doorway. "Smart people don't get turned away from opportunities like this because of money. There has to be a way to make the numbers work." I sat down across from him, genuinely wanting to help solve the problem. Maybe if we combined everything, federal loans, work-study programs, maybe Destiny could take a gap year and work to save up some money. "No gap year," Dad interrupted firmly. "Gap years are for kids who aren't serious about their futures. Destiny has momentum right now, she's at the top of her game academically. We can't risk losing that. Then maybe we need to accept that prestige university just isn't financially realistic right now," I said gently. "That doesn't mean Destiny can't become a doctor. It just means she might need to take a different path to get there." Dad's reaction was immediate and intense. He stood up so quickly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor, gathering up all the papers in a protective gesture as if I had threatened to destroy them. "I can't believe you would even suggest that," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "After everything we've worked for, after all the sacrifices we've made to get her this far, you want me to just give up? You want me to tell Destiny that her dreams don't matter because we can't figure out how to pay for them?" The accusation stung because it wasn't true. I wanted Destiny to succeed as much as anyone. But I was also beginning to understand that Dad's vision of success had become so narrow and specific that any alternative felt like failure to him. That was the moment when I saw something shift in his expression, a look of calculation that made my stomach clench with sudden anxiety. He had thought of something, a solution that he hadn't considered before, and the way he was looking at me suggested that whatever this solution was, it involved me in ways I wasn't going to like. "Actually," he said slowly, his voice taking on a different tone entirely, "maybe there is a way to make this work. Maybe I've been thinking about this all wrong." The announcement came 3 days later, delivered with the casual authority of someone who had already made an irreversible decision. I was getting ready for my evening shift at Henderson's Diner when Dad called me into the living room where he and Destiny were sitting together on the old floral couch that had belonged to my mother. "Roxanne, sit down," Dad said, gesturing to the worn armchair across from them. "We need to discuss some changes that are going to happen around here." The formal tone of his voice immediately put me on edge. This wasn't going to be a family discussion or a request for my input, this was going to be a pronouncement. Destiny looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater and avoiding eye contact with me. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about our financial situation," Dad began, pulling out a manila folder filled with papers. "And I've realized that we've been approaching this problem the wrong way. Instead of trying to find external sources of funding for Destiny's education, we need to maximize our internal resources." He opened the folder and spread several documents across the coffee table, budget spreadsheets, income projections, and what looked like employment applications. The sight of those applications made my chest tighten with a sense of impending doom. "From now on, you'll work 2 jobs to pay for your sister's tuition," Dad announced, not even bothering to look up from his papers. "Destiny deserves the best education money can buy, and since you're not college material anyway, this is how you'll contribute to the family." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him in disbelief, waiting for him to clarify that he was joking or that I had misunderstood something fundamental about what he was saying. But his expression remained serious and determined. "I've already spoken to Bill Morrison at Morrison Construction," he continued, as if my shocked silence was acceptance rather than paralysis. "They need someone to handle their administrative work, invoicing, scheduling, customer communications. It's a full-time position, 40 hours a week, and the pay is decent. Combined with your hours at Henderson's Diner, you should be able to cover most of Destiny's annual expenses." "Most?" I managed to croak out. "Well, I'll contribute what I can from the business profits," Dad said dismissively. "But the majority of the financial responsibility will fall to you. It's only fair, you're an adult now, and it's time you started contributing meaningfully to this family's success." I looked over at Destiny, hoping to see some sign of protest or discomfort with this arrangement, but she was staring down at her hands with an expression that suggested she had already known about Dad's plan. The realization that they had discussed this without me, that they had made decisions about my entire future without considering my input, was almost as devastating as the plan itself. "Dad, this is insane," I said, finding my voice. "You're talking about me working 80 hours a week for the next 4 years. When would I sleep? When would I have any kind of life of my own?" "Sleep and personal time are luxuries for people who don't have real responsibilities," Dad replied coldly. "Your sister is going to become a doctor, Roxanne. Do you understand what that means for this family? She'll be the first Carver to achieve real professional success, to make something significant of herself. Your role is to help make that possible." The casual cruelty of his words was breathtaking. He wasn't just asking me to sacrifice my time and energy, he was telling me that my dreams, whatever they might be, were worthless compared to Destiny's ambitions. "What about my own future?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "What about my plans to finish my bachelor's degree? What about the business? You always said I might take it over someday." Dad laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the living room walls. "Honey, let's be realistic here. The business is barely breaking even as it is, and the industry is changing. In 10 years, there probably won't be enough demand in Millfield Heights to support a plumbing supply shop. As for your education..." He shrugged dismissively. "You're 21 years old with an associate degree. That's more than enough for the kind of work you'll be doing." "The kind of work I'll be doing?" I repeated. "Administrative support, customer service, basic bookkeeping," he said, as if these were the natural limits of my capabilities. "You're good at following directions and managing details. Those are valuable skills, but they don't require a bachelor's degree." The conversation was surreal in its casual destruction of everything I had thought I understood about my place in the family. Dad was systematically dismantling my future while presenting it as a reasonable and necessary sacrifice for the greater good. "I've already told Morrison you'll start next Monday," he continued. "Mrs. Henderson is expecting you to increase your hours at the diner to at least 30 per week. Between the two jobs, you should be bringing in around $60,000 annually. After taxes and your basic living expenses, most of that can go toward Destiny's education costs." The fact that he had made these arrangements without consulting me was almost as shocking as the arrangements themselves. He had negotiated my employment, committed my time, and planned my entire future as if I were a piece of property rather than a person with my own agency and desires. "I won't do it," I said quietly. Dad's expression didn't change, but I could see his jaw tighten. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I said I won't do it," I repeated, louder this time. "I won't work 80 hours a week to pay for Destiny's college. I won't sacrifice 4 years of my life for this plan." "Yes, you will," Dad said with absolute certainty. "Because you live in my house, under my roof, and you'll follow my rules. Because this family has invested 21 years in raising you, and now it's time for you to give something back. Because your sister deserves better than to have her dreams limited by our financial circumstances." "What about my dreams?" I demanded. "What dreams?" Dad shot back. "Working at a diner? Managing inventory at a plumbing supply shop? Those aren't dreams, Roxanne, those are just jobs. Destiny has real ambitions, real potential to make a difference in the world. Your job is to help her achieve those ambitions." The dismissal was complete and devastating. In Dad's mind, I was incapable of having meaningful dreams because I was incapable of meaningful achievement. My value lay entirely in my utility to Destiny's success. "Besides," he added with a tone that suggested the discussion was over, "it's not like you have anywhere else to go. This is your family, and family members support each other. This is how you're going to support your sister." As I sat there in the living room where I had played as a child, where Mom used to read us bedtime stories, where I had once felt safe and loved, I realized that everything had changed irrevocably. Dad wasn't asking for my help, he was conscripting me into a role I had never agreed to play, sacrificing my autonomy for a future that would benefit everyone except me. The worst part was that he genuinely believed this arrangement was not only reasonable but noble. The days immediately following Dad's announcement felt like living in a house where everyone was speaking a language I didn't understand. The casual way that both he and Destiny had accepted this new reality, where my entire existence would revolve around funding her education, was more disorienting than the plan itself. I had expected some pushback from Destiny, some acknowledgement that Dad's demands were unreasonable. Instead, she seemed to view my resistance as selfishness that needed to be overcome through patient explanation. "Roxy, I know it seems like a lot," she said the morning after Dad's announcement, finding me in the kitchen before my shift at Henderson's. "But think about it this way, you're investing in our family's future. When I'm a successful surgeon, I'll be able to pay you back everything and more." The nickname she used, Roxy, had been her pet name for me since childhood, and hearing it now felt like manipulation wrapped in false affection. She was sitting at the kitchen table in her pajamas, eating the breakfast I had prepared while I stood at the sink washing the dishes from the meal she was consuming. "Destiny, I'm 21 years old," I said without turning around. "For years of working 80 hours a week, do you understand what that means? I'll be 25 when you graduate, with no education beyond my associate degree, no work experience except manual labor, no savings, no relationships because I'll never have time for anything except work." "But you'll have helped me become a doctor," she replied, as if this achievement would somehow compensate for the complete destruction of my own prospects. "You'll be part of something important, something that matters." The assumption that my life only mattered in relation to her success was so deeply embedded in our family dynamic that Destiny couldn't even recognize it as problematic. In her mind, my sacrifice wasn't tragic, it was noble, even enviable. Dad, meanwhile, had thrown himself into the logistics of implementing his plan with the enthusiasm of someone who had solved a complex puzzle. He had created detailed spreadsheets showing exactly how my dual employment would cover Destiny's expenses, factoring in everything from tuition increases to textbook costs. He had even calculated how much I would need to contribute toward household expenses during the years I continued living at home. "You'll keep $300 per month for personal expenses," he announced, showing me a budget breakdown that included every aspect of my financial future. "That should be enough for clothes, personal items, maybe occasional entertainment. Everything else goes toward Destiny's education and your contribution to household costs." $300 per month for personal expenses meant $75 per week for everything that wasn't basic survival. Gas for my car, any social activities, clothing replacements, medical expenses not covered by insurance, savings for emergencies, all of it would have to fit within that tiny budget. The calculation assumed that I would have no significant expenses, no unexpected costs, no desire for anything beyond bare subsistence. The Monday morning when I was supposed to start at Morrison Construction, I called in sick. It was a desperate and ultimately futile attempt to delay the inevitable, but I needed time to think, to process what was happening to my life. Dad's reaction when he discovered my absence was swift and unforgiving. "Bill Morrison called to check on you," he said when I returned from a long walk through Millfield Heights' small downtown area. "He was concerned when you didn't show up for your first day. I had to make excuses for you, tell him you were dealing with a family emergency." Dad was standing in the living room with his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of disappointment and controlled anger. Destiny was visible through the kitchen doorway, supposedly doing homework but clearly listening to our conversation. "I told him you would be there tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp," Dad continued. "And you will be, Roxanne. This isn't a game, and it isn't negotiable. You made a commitment to this family, and you're going to honor it." "I never made any commitment," I protested. "You made these decisions without consulting me. You arranged my employment, planned my future, and committed my time without asking what I wanted." "What you want isn't relevant," Dad replied with stunning directness. "You're part of a family, and families make sacrifices for each other. I sacrificed to raise you after your mother died. Destiny sacrifices by maintaining the academic excellence that earned her this opportunity. Now it's your turn to sacrifice for the greater good." The false equivalency was breathtaking. Dad had sacrificed to raise me because that was his legal and moral obligation as a parent. Destiny's sacrifice of studying hard was something that benefited her directly through scholarships and college admission. My sacrifice, meanwhile, involved giving up my entire future with no personal benefit whatsoever. But pointing out these distinctions only made Dad more determined to justify his position. In his mind, questioning the plan was evidence of my selfishness and ingratitude rather than reasonable concern for my own well-being. Besides, he added with a tone that suggested he was delivering the final word on the subject, "It's not like you have better options. You're 21 years old with minimal work experience and an associate degree from a community college. Do you really think you're going to find some amazing career opportunity in Millfield Heights? This plan gives you steady employment and a meaningful purpose." The dismissal of my potential was casual and complete. Dad had decided that I was incapable of achieving anything significant on my own, so channeling my efforts toward Destiny's success was not just practical but generous. He was giving me a way to be part of something important since I couldn't create anything important myself. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom surrounded by faded posters and stuffed animals that belonged to a different version of myself, I tried to imagine what the next 4 years would look like. Waking up at 6 every morning to be at Morrison Construction by 8. Working until 5, then rushing home to change clothes before my evening shift at Henderson's Diner. Getting home after midnight, exhausted and resentful, only to repeat the cycle the next day. No time for friends, no energy for hobbies, no opportunity to pursue education or career development. No chance to date, to travel, to explore who I might become if given the freedom to make my own choices. Just 4 years of grinding labor in service of someone else's dreams while my own possibilities withered from neglect. The most painful part wasn't even the work itself, it was the casual way that my family had written off my future as acceptable collateral damage in pursuit of Destiny's success. They had looked at my life and decided it was worth less than her tuition payments. When I finally started at Morrison Construction the next day, I felt like someone attending their own funeral. The work itself was mind-numbing: data entry, phone calls, filing documents that would be forgotten within weeks. But the psychological weight of knowing that every hour I spent in that fluorescent-lit office was time stolen from my own development was crushing. Bill Morrison was a decent man who seemed genuinely surprised when I explained that I would also be working evenings at a restaurant. "That's quite a schedule," he said with concern. "Are you sure you can handle both jobs? We don't want your performance here to suffer because you're overextended." I assured him that I could manage the workload, but privately I wondered the same thing. How long could I maintain this pace? How long before the exhaustion and resentment destroyed whatever remained of my relationship with my family? And most importantly, what would be left of me at the end of 4 years of this existence? The answers to those questions would come sooner than I expected. The first 6 months of working 2 jobs nearly broke me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The physical exhaustion was brutal. 14-hour days that left me so tired I would sometimes fall asleep standing up while washing dishes at Henderson's Diner. But the psychological toll was even worse. I felt like I was disappearing, becoming invisible even to myself. At Morrison Construction, I threw myself into the work with a determination that surprised everyone, including myself. If I was going to sacrifice my 20s for Destiny's education, I was at least going to excel at the jobs that were consuming my life. I reorganized their entire filing system, implemented digital tracking for project timelines, and identified several inefficiencies in their billing process that saved the company thousands of dollars. Bill Morrison noticed my efforts and began giving me increasingly complex responsibilities. Within 3 months, I was essentially functioning as his assistant project manager, coordinating between contractors, suppliers, and clients with a competence that impressed veteran employees who had been with the company for years. "You've got real talent for this work," Bill told me during my 6-month review. "Have you ever thought about pursuing a degree in project management or business administration? We'd be happy to work with your class schedule if you wanted to take evening courses." The irony was devastating. Here was an opportunity for professional development and career advancement, exactly what I had dreamed of when I finished my associate degree, being offered just as Dad's plan had made it impossible to pursue. I had to decline Bill's generous offer while pretending to be grateful for the suggestion. "I appreciate that, Mr. Morrison," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I have family obligations that make going back to school impossible right now." The disappointment in his eyes was almost unbearable. Bill was a good man who genuinely wanted to see his employees succeed, and my refusal to pursue obvious opportunities probably seemed like a lack of ambition rather than the result of circumstances beyond my control. At Henderson's Diner, my evening shifts became a different kind of education. The restaurant attracted a mix of longtime locals, traveling salespeople, and young families who couldn't afford fancier establishments. Working there taught me about people in ways that no classroom ever could: how to read customers' moods, manage difficult personalities, and maintain professional composure even when dealing with unreasonable demands. Mrs. Henderson, who had initially been skeptical about my ability to handle increased hours, became increasingly dependent on my reliability. When other servers called in sick or quit without notice, I was the one she turned to for coverage. When suppliers tried to shortchange her on deliveries, I was the one who caught the discrepancies and demanded corrections. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Roxanne," she told me one particularly busy Friday night as we closed the restaurant together. "You've got more sense and work ethic than employees twice your age." The praise felt hollow because I knew that my exceptional performance was born of desperation rather than genuine enthusiasm. I was excelling at these jobs because they represented my entire existence. There was nothing else in my life to divide my attention or energy. Meanwhile, Destiny had started her freshman year at Prestige University with the kind of optimistic excitement that made our family's financial sacrifice seem almost worthwhile. Her phone calls home were filled with stories about fascinating professors, challenging coursework, and new friends who shared her academic ambitions. My organic chemistry professor used to work for a pharmaceutical company developing cancer treatments, she gushed during one of our weekly conversations. She says she might have research opportunities for serious students next semester. I tried to share in her enthusiasm, but listening to her describe her college experiences while I was getting ready for another double shift felt like torture. She was living the life I had dreamed of: intellectual stimulation, personal growth, exposure to new ideas and possibilities, while I was trapped in a cycle of manual labor and exhaustion. Dad tracked every penny I earned with the obsessive attention of an accountant. Each month, he would present me with detailed statements showing exactly how my contributions were being allocated toward Destiny's expenses. Tuition payments, room and board, textbooks, lab fees, even her meal plan, all of it funded by my labor. "You should be proud of what you're accomplishing," he said one evening as we reviewed the monthly budget. "Destiny's grades are excellent, she's making valuable connections, and she's on track to get into medical school. None of this would be possible without your dedication." The word dedication felt like mockery. What Dad called dedication, I experienced as captivity. I hadn't chosen this arrangement, it had been imposed on me through emotional manipulation and economic coercion. But something unexpected began happening as the months passed. The skills I was developing at both jobs, combined with the financial knowledge I was gaining from Dad's obsessive budget management, started to give me insights into business operations that I had never possessed before. I began to see inefficiencies and opportunities everywhere, not just at Morrison Construction or Henderson's Diner, but in the broader Millfield Heights business community. The hardware store on Main Street was losing customers because they couldn't compete with big box retailers on price, but they weren't leveraging their advantages in specialized knowledge and personal service. The local landscaping companies were struggling with scheduling and communication problems that could be solved with basic project management software. Even Dad's plumbing supply business had obvious areas for improvement that he was too set in his ways to recognize. During my few moments of free time, usually late at night when exhaustion kept me awake despite my fatigue, I started sketching out business plans and improvement strategies. Not because I had any immediate way to implement them, but because thinking about solutions to other people's problems was the only mental stimulation I had access to. I also began tracking my own finances with the same obsessive detail that Dad used for Destiny's expenses. Every dollar I earned, every dollar I was forced to contribute to her education, every dollar of the meager personal allowance I was permitted to keep. The numbers told a story of systematic exploitation that became harder to ignore as the months accumulated. In my first year of working 2 jobs, I had earned approximately $58,000. After taxes, household contributions, and Destiny's education expenses, I had been allowed to keep $3,600 for personal use, roughly 6% of what I had actually earned. The remaining 94% had been redistributed to support other people's priorities while my own future remained unfunded and unplanned. But perhaps most importantly, I was beginning to understand that my situation wasn't permanent unless I allowed it to be. Dad's plan assumed that I would remain passive and compliant indefinitely, that I would never develop the confidence or capabilities to challenge the arrangement he had imposed. What he hadn't anticipated was that forcing me into intense professional environments would accelerate my practical education in ways that classroom learning never could have. By the end of my first year in this arrangement, I was no longer the uncertain 21-year-old who had been intimidated by Dad's authoritative pronouncements about my limitations and obligations. I was becoming someone else entirely, someone with skills, knowledge, and most dangerously, a growing sense of my own worth that had nothing to do with my usefulness to Destiny's ambitions. The transformation wasn't complete yet, but the foundation was being laid for something Dad would never see coming. The catalyst that would change everything arrived in the form of an unexpected phone call during my second year of the grueling double job arrangement. I was at Morrison Construction, reviewing contractor invoices during my lunch break, when my personal cell phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Roxanne Carver?" asked a professional-sounding woman's voice. "Yes, this is Roxanne. My name is Patricia Westfield. I'm a business consultant based in Riverside, and I've been hearing some interesting things about your work at Morrison Construction. Would you have time to meet for coffee this week? I have a proposition that might interest you." The call was so unexpected that I initially thought it might be some kind of scam. Business consultants from the big city didn't typically reach out to administrative assistants in small towns like Millfield Heights. But Patricia's credentials checked out when I researched her company online, and her reputation in the regional business community was impressive. We met at Romano's, the same upscale restaurant where Dad had taken Destiny to celebrate her SAT scores. Patricia was a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s with the kind of confident energy that immediately commanded attention. She had done her homework before our meeting. "I've been consulting with Morrison Construction on their expansion plans," she explained over coffee. "Bill Morrison has been raving about your organizational skills and business insights. He mentioned that you've identified several operational improvements that have saved the company significant money." I felt a flush of pride mixed with confusion. I just noticed some inefficiencies and suggested solutions. "It's part of my job." Patricia smiled. "That kind of analytical thinking isn't actually part of most people's jobs, even when it should be. Bill also told me about some of the project management innovations you've implemented. You've essentially been doing the work of a senior business analyst without the title or compensation." She leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. "I'm launching a new consulting firm that specializes in helping small and medium-sized businesses optimize their operations. I need someone with your combination of practical experience and analytical ability. Someone who understands how things actually work in the real world, not just how they look on paper." The offer she presented was staggering. Patricia wanted to hire me as a junior business consultant, starting at a salary that was nearly double what I was earning from both my current jobs combined. The position would involve traveling throughout the region, working with different companies to solve operational problems and implement efficiency improvements. There would be a significant learning curve, she admitted. You'd need to develop expertise in areas like financial analysis, strategic planning, and change management. But I believe you have the natural aptitude for this work, and I'm willing to invest in your professional development. I sat in Romano's, staring at this unexpected opportunity, feeling like someone had just offered me a lifeline while I was drowning. But the magnitude of what accepting would mean was overwhelming. This wasn't just a better job, it was a complete escape from the life Dad had planned for me. "I'm extremely interested," I told Patricia carefully, "but I have some family obligations that make my situation complicated. Could I have some time to think about it?" "Of course. But don't take too long, opportunities like this don't wait forever." That evening, I sat in my bedroom trying to process what had just happened. Patricia's offer represented everything I had dreamed of but never believed was possible for someone with my background and circumstances. Professional respect, financial independence, intellectual challenge, and most importantly, the chance to build a future based on my own capabilities rather than my willingness to sacrifice for someone else's ambitions. But I also knew what Dad's reaction would be. He had invested 2 years in an arrangement that depended entirely on my continued compliance and availability. Destiny was halfway through her undergraduate program, and the financial commitments were more binding than ever. From Dad's perspective, my abandoning the plan now would be an unforgivable betrayal. When I finally worked up the courage to broach the subject, I tried to frame it as a family opportunity rather than a personal escape. Dad was in the living room, reviewing bills as usual, when I approached him with Patricia's business card. "I got an interesting job offer today," I began carefully. "A business consultant from Riverside wants to hire me as a junior analyst. The salary would be significantly higher than what I'm making now." Dad looked up from his paperwork with immediate suspicion. "Higher how?" "Almost twice what I'm earning from both jobs combined." For a moment, I saw something flicker in Dad's expression, surprise, maybe even pride that someone had recognized my capabilities. But it was quickly replaced by calculation as he processed the implications. "What kind of travel would be involved?" he asked. "Some regional travel, but I'd still be based in this area. The point is, with the higher income, I could contribute even more to Destiny's expenses while actually having better career prospects." It was a careful argument designed to appeal to Dad's priorities while advancing my own interests. If he could see the financial benefits of my career advancement, maybe he would support the opportunity rather than viewing it as a threat to his control. But Dad's response revealed how completely he had committed to seeing me as a resource rather than a person with legitimate aspirations. "Roxanne, you can't just abandon your responsibilities for some pipe dream of a fancy career," he said dismissively. "We have a system that's working. Destiny is doing well in school, the bills are getting paid, and everyone knows what's expected of them. You want to throw all of that away to chase after some consultant job that probably won't last 6 months? This isn't a pipe dream," I protested. "Patricia Westfield has an established business with real clients. She specifically sought me out because of my work performance. And what happens when her business fails, or when she decides you're not qualified for the job after all?" Dad countered. "What happens when you're unemployed and we've lost the steady income stream that's paying for your sister's education?" The conversation revealed the fundamental difference in how we viewed my future. Dad saw my current arrangement as stable and reliable, even though it offered no prospects for advancement or personal growth. Any deviation from the established plan represented dangerous uncertainty that could jeopardize Destiny's success. Besides, Dad added with finality, "You made a commitment to this family. Your sister is counting on you, and I'm counting on you. You can't just walk away from your obligations because something shinier came along." That night, I lay awake thinking about commitments and obligations. I had never actually committed to Dad's plan. It had been imposed on me through emotional manipulation and economic coercion. The obligation he referenced was entirely one-sided, benefiting everyone except the person who was expected to fulfill it. More importantly, I realized that Dad's resistance to my advancement wasn't really about financial stability or family loyalty. It was about control. My current arrangement kept me dependent and available, unable to develop the independence that might threaten his authority over my life choices. But Patricia's offer had shown me something crucial. I was no longer the uncertain 21-year-old who could be intimidated by Dad's pronouncements about my limitations. 2 years of intensive work experience had given me skills, confidence, and most dangerously from Dad's perspective, options. The decision I made next would determine not just my immediate future, but the entire trajectory of my relationship with my family. And for the first time since Dad had announced his plan, I was beginning to believe that my future mattered more than his expectations. The confrontation I had been avoiding finally became inevitable when I accepted Patricia's job offer. I had spent 3 sleepless nights weighing the decision, but ultimately realized that this opportunity might never come again. At 23, after 2 years of sacrificing everything for Destiny's education, I couldn't let fear of Dad's reaction trap me in a life that was slowly destroying my spirit. I gave my notice at both Morrison Construction and Henderson's Diner on the same day, planning to tell Dad about my decision that evening. But news travels fast in a small town like Millfield Heights, and he found out before I could explain the situation properly. I was packing my few belongings when he stormed into my bedroom, his face flushed with a rage I had never seen before. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, standing in my doorway like an avenging angel. Bill Morrison called to congratulate me on your promotion. Said you were moving on to bigger and better things. Care to explain what that means? The sarcasm in his voice when he said promotion made it clear that he viewed my advancement as some kind of betrayal rather than an achievement. I set down the box I was packing and turned to face him. I got the consulting job I told you about, I said as calmly as possible. I start Monday with Patricia Westfield's firm. After I explicitly told you that wasn't an option, Dad said, his voice rising. After I explained why that plan was irresponsible and selfish. After you gave me your word that you understood your obligations to this family. I never gave you my word about anything, I replied. You made decisions about my life without consulting me, and I've spent 2 years living with the consequences. This is my chance to build something for myself. Dad stepped into my room, and for a moment I was genuinely afraid he might become physically aggressive. His hands were clenched into fists, and the vein in his forehead was pulsing in a way that reminded me of the few times I had seen him truly lose control. Your chance, he repeated incredulously. What about Destiny's chance? What about the promises we made to ensure her success? What about the thousands of dollars you've already contributed that will be wasted if she can't finish her degree? Destiny can finish her degree, I said firmly. She can take out student loans like millions of other college students. She can work part-time jobs like I did. She can find scholarships or grants or any number of other funding sources that don't require me to sacrifice my entire future. The suggestion that Destiny might need to find alternative funding sources seemed to genuinely shock Dad. In his mind, asking her to work or take on debt would be a fundamental betrayal of her potential. Student loans, he said with disgust. You want your sister to graduate with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt? You want her to spend the first 15 years of her career paying off loans instead of building wealth and security? I want her to take responsibility for her own choices, I replied. The way every other college student in America does. This isn't about responsibility, Dad shot back. This is about you being selfish and ungrateful. This family has invested everything in your sister's future because she has the potential to achieve something significant. You're throwing that away for some fantasy about becoming a business consultant. The casual dismissal of my career opportunity as a fantasy revealed everything I needed to know about how Dad really viewed my capabilities. Even when a successful professional had specifically recruited me based on my demonstrated skills, he still couldn't accept that I might be capable of meaningful achievement. It's not a fantasy, I said, my voice hardening. It's a real job with a real company offering real opportunities for advancement. The only fantasy here is your belief that I owe you my entire life because you did the bare minimum required of a parent. That was the line that pushed Dad over the edge. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The bare minimum, he repeated. I raised you for 21 years after your mother died. I put a roof over your head, food on your table, clothes on your back. I supported your education and gave you opportunities that plenty of kids never get. And this is how you repay me? You raised me because that was your legal and moral obligation as a parent, I replied. You don't get credit for meeting your basic responsibilities, and you certainly don't get to use those responsibilities as leverage to control my adult life. The argument escalated from there, with Dad cycling through every manipulation tactic he had perfected over the years. He accused me of destroying the family, of being jealous of Destiny's success, of lacking the character to honor my commitments. When emotional manipulation failed, he tried financial coercion. If you walk out that door, don't expect to come back, he threatened. If you abandon your responsibilities to this family, then you're no longer part of this family. You'll be on your own, completely on your own. The ultimatum was designed to terrify me into compliance, but instead it felt like liberation. Being completely on my own meant freedom from his control, freedom from his expectations, freedom from the suffocating arrangement that had consumed 2 years of my life. I can live with that, I said quietly. Dad's expression shifted from anger to something approaching panic as he realized that his final threat had failed to achieve the desired result. For the first time in our relationship, he was facing the possibility that I might actually walk away from everything he thought I owed him. You're making a huge mistake, he said, his voice becoming pleading rather than threatening. This consulting job won't last. These people don't know you like I do. When they figure out that you're not as capable as they think, you'll be unemployed and alone with nowhere to turn. The prediction of my inevitable failure was perhaps the cruelest thing he had said during our entire argument, but it also clarified something important about our relationship. Dad didn't just want me to remain compliant. He needed me to remain compliant because my independence would force him to confront his own limitations as a provider and protector. Maybe you're right, I said, shouldering my bag and heading for the door. Maybe I'll fail completely and end up with nothing. But at least it will be my failure, not someone else's script for my life. I walked past him toward the front door, where Destiny was standing in shocked silence. She had apparently been listening to the entire argument, and her expression suggested that she was finally beginning to understand the true cost of Dad's plan. "Roxy, wait," she said as I reached for the door handle. "Maybe we can figure something else out. Maybe there's a compromise." I turned to look at my sister, this person I had sacrificed so much for, and realized that she still didn't really understand what had been asked of me. In her mind, my dissatisfaction was a problem to be managed rather than a fundamental injustice to be corrected. "There's no compromise here, Destiny," I said gently. "Either I spend my life serving your ambitions, or I build something for myself. There's no middle ground." As I walked out the front door of the house where I had grown up, I could hear Dad shouting behind me, making threats and predictions that no longer had any power to influence my decisions. I was 23 years old, professionally qualified, and for the first time in my adult life, completely free to determine my own future. The confrontation was over, but the real test was just beginning. 5 years later, I was sitting in my corner office at Westfield and Associates when my secretary buzzed me with an unexpected message. "Ms. Carver, there's a Theodore Carver here to see you. He says he's your father and that it's urgent family business." I stared out my window at the riverside skyline, processing the fact that Dad had somehow tracked me down to my workplace. In the 5 years since I had walked out of his house, we had maintained absolute silence. No phone calls, no emails, no birthday cards or holiday greetings. As far as I was concerned, our relationship had ended the moment he chose his pride over my well-being. "Tell him I'll be with him in 10 minutes, I said finally. Those 10 minutes gave me time to prepare mentally for whatever desperate scheme had brought him to my office. Through Patricia's mentorship and my own relentless work ethic, I had built something remarkable from the ashes of our family conflict. I was now a senior business consultant with my own team of analysts, specializing in operational turnarounds for struggling companies. My client list included several Fortune 500 corporations, and my reputation in the regional business community was solid enough that I had recently been featured in a major industry magazine. The woman who had walked out of that house in Millfield Heights was barely recognizable in the professional I had become. But I suspected that Dad's visit had nothing to do with pride in my accomplishments and everything to do with needing something from me. When I walked into the conference room where Dad was waiting, I was struck by how much he had aged. His hair was completely gray now, his shoulders were stooped, and his clothes looked worn in a way that suggested financial stress rather than casual comfort. He stood up when I entered, his expression a mixture of nervousness and desperate hope. "Roxanne," he said, his voice catching slightly on my name. You look successful." "I am successful," I replied, taking a seat across from him but maintaining professional distance. "What do you want, Dad?" He had clearly prepared for this conversation, but my direct approach seemed to throw him off balance. He fumbled with a manila folder he had brought, spreading documents across the conference table with shaking hands. "I need your help," he said finally. "The business is failing. Destiny graduated last year but she's struggling to get into medical school, and I made some mistakes." The documents he showed me painted a picture of complete financial collapse. The plumbing supply business had lost most of its major customers to larger competitors. Dad had taken out multiple loans against the house to keep the operation running, and those loans were now in default. Most devastatingly, Destiny had graduated from prestige university with massive student debt but had failed to gain admission to any medical school. "She took the MCAT 3 times, Dad explained, his voice hollow with defeat. "Her scores just weren't competitive enough. All those years of preparation, all that money we spent on her education, and she's working as a medical technician making $30,000 a year. The irony was staggering. Dad had sacrificed everything, including his relationship with me, to fund an outcome that had failed to materialize. Destiny's expensive undergraduate education had produced no better results than if she had attended State University as I had originally suggested. I lost the house last month, Dad continued, his confession tumbling out in a rush. I'm living with Destiny in a one-bedroom apartment, and we can barely afford rent. The business is going to close next week unless I can find $15,000 to pay the most urgent creditors. I listened to his recitation of disasters with a mixture of sadness and vindication. This was the logical endpoint of his short-sighted planning and authoritarian decision-making. But I felt no satisfaction in being proven right, only pity for a man who had destroyed his family pursuing an impossible dream. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Dad's expression became pleading, desperate in a way that reminded me of my own desperation 5 years earlier when he had dismissed my future as acceptable collateral damage. I know I made mistakes, he said. I know I was wrong about a lot of things. But you're successful now, you're making good money, and we're family. I thought maybe you could help us get back on our feet. The request hung in the air between us, loaded with years of resentment and unresolved conflict. Dad was essentially asking me to fund the same people who had written off my potential and demanded my sacrifice for dreams that had proved to be illusions. How much would you need? I asked. Hope flickered in Dad's eyes. 50,000 would cover all the debts and give us a fresh start. I know it's a lot, but I could pay you back once the business is profitable again. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, showing Dad the balance in my checking account. His eyes widened when he saw the number. I currently had more in liquid assets than he had earned in the best year of his business career. I could write you a check for $50,000 right now, I said calmly. It wouldn't significantly impact my financial position. Dad's relief was palpable. Roxanne, I can't tell you how much this means. But I'm not going to, I interrupted. His face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, disappointment, and finally anger. What do you mean you're not going to? You just said you have the money. I do have the money, I confirmed. Money I earned through my own efforts. Building a career you said was impossible for someone with my limitations. Money I accumulated because I chose to invest in my own future rather than subsidizing someone else's dreams. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was ending. 5 years ago, you told me that my dreams didn't matter, that my role was to sacrifice everything for Destiny's success. You bet our entire family's future on her potential while dismissing mine as worthless. Now you want me to bail you out of the consequences of those decisions. That's not fair, Dad protested. I was trying to do what was best for the family. You were trying to do what made you feel important, I corrected. You wanted to be the father of a successful doctor, and you were willing to sacrifice my entire future to make that happen. The fact that your plan failed doesn't create any obligation on my part to fix the damage you caused. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final observation. The most tragic part of this whole situation is that if you had supported my career development 5 years ago instead of trying to trap me in servitude, I would be in a position to help you now and would probably be willing to do it. But you destroyed our relationship because you couldn't see past your own narrow definition of success. Dad made one final desperate appeal. Roxanne, please. I know I made mistakes, but we're still family. Doesn't that count for something? Family is supposed to support each other's growth and potential, I replied. You used family as an excuse to exploit my labor and dismiss my dreams. That's not family. That's just economic coercion wrapped in emotional manipulation. I left him sitting in that conference room, surrounded by the financial wreckage of his authoritarian approach to family management. My secretary later told me that he sat there for another 20 minutes before quietly gathering his papers and leaving. That evening, I called my attorney and had him draft a document that would become my father's final lesson in the consequences of treating family members as disposable resources. It was a formal offer to purchase Dad's failing business for exactly $15,000, enough to satisfy his immediate creditors but not enough to restore his financial stability. The purchase agreement included one non-negotiable condition: Dad would have no operational role in the business going forward. I would hire professional management and run it as a subsidiary of my consulting firm. Within 6 months, I had turned the plumbing supply business into a profitable operation by implementing the same efficiency improvements I had recognized years earlier but had been forbidden to suggest. The business that Dad had nearly destroyed through stubbornness and poor planning was now generating significant revenue under competent management. But the most satisfying part wasn't the financial success, it was the knowledge that I had built something valuable from the ashes of Dad's failures while maintaining my own integrity and independence. I had proven that his assessment of my limitations was not just wrong, but catastrophically wrong. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well enough that your former oppressors have to witness the success they tried to prevent. Dad learned that lesson the hard way, and it was a lesson that came far too late to repair the damage he had inflicted on our family relationships. 5 years of freedom had taught me that my worth wasn't determined by my willingness to sacrifice for other people's dreams, but by my ability to build something meaningful from my own vision and efforts. It was a lesson worth every moment of the struggle required to learn it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.